A warm welcome to RemTech Europe. My name is Patricia Ruiz. I am from the Scientific Committee of RemTech, and today I have a pleasure to present you a training course, a state-of-the-art of Contaminate site management in Brazil. And I'd like to remember, if you have a question, please use the chat so we'll answer you as soon as possible. And I'd like to thank you and all presenters that are here with us. And I'd like to give the floor to Anna, and I will share the session with us. So Anna, thank you so much to stay here with us. Thank you, Bernd. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, Thiago, to represent IASAS here in RemTech Europe. And please, Anna, the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you, Marco.
Whoops, thank you very much, Patricia. Good afternoon to all. Good morning here in Brazil. It's a pleasure to be invited to this session of RemTech Europe. We will have a nice afternoon as soon as I find out where my information went. We will begin with Thiago. We have Thiago presenting IASAS. IASAS is the Association of Environmental Consulting and Engineering Firms in Brazil. So I will welcome Thiago so he can make his brief presentation of our association.
Thank you, Anna. Let me share my screen. Good morning, everyone from Brazil. Good afternoon from everybody who's in Europe. Good night for everybody who's in Asia. So as Anna mentioned, IASAS is the Association for the Environmental and Consultancy Companies in Brazil. We represent over 100 companies from all over the world that have either an office or has been doing work in Brazil. On our members, we have consultancy company, labs, drilling companies, companies specialized in remediation, companies that are specialized in selling products for all the environmental services. We also have sampling companies, environmental sampling companies, and also contaminated soil disposal companies. Our main activities as IASAS is pretty much to develop the market in Brazil, increase the technical aspects. So we have technical groups. Nowadays, we have more than 10 technical groups inside IASAS discussing many different things. We also sponsor the ABNT. ABNT is the Brazilian Association for Standards Development, and as the chairs for the environmental branch for ABNT, IASAS is responsible for developing all the standards that will be used in Brazil. We also work very close to public authorities and other associations, public authorities such as the Federal Environmental Ministry and states environmental agencies. We have, in the past 1 year, we have qualified over 2,000 public employees on our course. We helped develop many different laws and procedures. And we also are a member of public chambers specialized in contaminated area management. We have a very strong commitment with qualification, improving qualification. We have a partnership with SENAC. SENAC is a an university in Brazil that is partially funded with public money. And this partnership has been for the past over 5 years. We have trained many different course. Over 4,000 or 5,000 people have been joining on our course. and we have seen a very good improvement on the on the quality of the labor in Brazil for the past years due to this partnership. So thank you, Marco. Thank you, Remtech, for inviting IESAS to be part of Remtech 2021. We hope you guys enjoy our program today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thiago, for your presentation of IESAS. I will remember everybody of our program today. So this is the training course, as was already said, of the state of the art of contaminated site management in Brazil. It's I will give a brief presentation now on the management of contaminated sites in Brazil, of an overview of what has been happening since the beginning of this activities in Brazil. Next, after me, my colleague Bernd Seelhorst will talk about high resolution investigation tools in Brazil. Right after that, Thiago Gomes will talk about remediation techniques applied in the Brazilian scenario. And Paulo Santos, also my colleague, will talk about site rehabilitation and reuse in Brazil. Just in order to organize a little bit, we are considering that the questions can be done via through the chat right after each one of the presentations, okay? We might be a little, if any of your colleagues want to come in to see any of these presentations, we recommend that they come in now. So if you can talk to your colleagues, we have the session is supposed to be a little bit briefer than is estimated in the program, okay? So now I will start my presentation as soon as I can find it right here. Here we are. Hope you are all seeing my slideshow. So I want to begin giving you the framework for environmental management of contaminated sites in Brazil. So we have one main legislation, which is called the Konoma Resolution 420 of 2009. This resolution, it gives us it establishes the screening levels for soil and groundwater. For soil, I have an example here for inorganics. For soil, it establishes four levels: prevention levels, which are considered still not a risk level, agricultural levels, residential levels, industrial levels, and also we have a level for groundwater. Okay. This resolution was established a few years ago, as you can see, and in 2009, and it also establishes each sorry, I forgot the word. Each pace of what you have to do in order to manage a contaminated site in Brazil. Okay. It also establishes, and this is very important, it also establishes that each state in Brazil has to establish its local screening levels. We have 26 states in Brazil, and although we have 26 states in Brazil, we have only 6 states of the 20 states have established local screening levels. So therefore, you can see how much we still have to move forward in the management of contaminated sites, and how the market is still very incipient and has a lot of growth in the following years. Okay. This resolution, it also establishes the classification of the sites in Brazil. So a site can be considered a suspected site where you do not have any evidence of contamination, but you have activities that can contaminate a site. Okay, you have a area established as contaminated, or where it has already gone through an investigation and a contamination has already been confirmed. You have a classification of areas under investigation, which are areas that are under the management of contaminated sites framework, and soil and groundwater and vapor also. You already had a vapor intrusion session, are being investigated to determine the size of the contamination. You have areas that are considered under intervention, where the investigation has been finalized. That is what is considered. The investigation has been finalized and the area is already under remediation or an institutional control or an engineering control. Remediation is considered the removal of mass of contaminants from soil, groundwater, or vapor phase. Engineering controls are considered those controls that you put in place so the receptor will not enter in contact with the contamination. Therefore, it can be a pavement, it can be an extraction of vapor, it can also be a fence. So they are controls where you put in place so the receptor will not enter in contact with the contamination. And the institutional controls, which are like prohibits of drinking groundwater, or the prohibits of establishing an enclosed space. These are institutional controls which are also put in the property deed so that future owners also know that the area is under this control. So we have these three possibilities of intervention in Brazil: remediation, engineering controls, and institutional controls. And finally, we have the possibility of an area being in monitoring for rehabilitation. So the area has already been under intervention through one of the three possibilities, or a mix of these possibilities, which I have already told you. And the area is being monitored to make sure that these controls that are in place are being effective. So an area can be monitored for rehabilitation. And finally, the area can be considered rehabilitated for a determined use: a commercial, industrial, residential, or agricultural use. This resolution also establishes the difference between an emergency area and a risk area. If the area is considered an emergency area, even if you have not finalized your investigation, you are required to put in place emergential measures so that the area does not pose risk to the people or to the environment. And an area considered of risk is that one where it has gone through a human health risk assessment. The investigation has been finalized. It has gone through the human health risk assessment, and the area poses risk to the people or to the environment. This resolution also established that a contaminated site shall be given a communication and publicity to all the stakeholders which are involved with this site. Okay, So it also established the necessity of the legal owner of the site to communicate the agencies, environmental agencies and health agencies, and give publicity to all the stakeholders involved of what type of contamination is in place. And it also allows for a contaminated site to be rehabilitated. And Paulo will talk about that a little bit. What I mean here is that it allows, this framework allows, this resolution allows that an industrial site can be rehabilitated to a residential site, for example, okay? So you have an industrial contaminated site, you can clean it up, you can establish engineering controls, and you can establish institutional controls so it can be rehabilitated to a residential use. So it allows that a contaminated area be used for a more noble condition, or it also allows that you can establish a future use for the site, even though a site, for example, continues to be industrial today, it can be planned to be used as a residential or commercial site in the future. So these are very important frameworks that are established in this resolution, and all the state resolutions are based upon this 2009 federal resolution. Okay. So what are the paces we have to do to recover a contaminated site in Brazil? First of all, the site has to go through a preliminary site assessment, which we call in Brazil, which is the phase 1 site assessment that is known internationally. So you have to, the legal responsible for the site has to contract a environmental consulting company to come to the site and identify all the potential areas of concern, which we call in Brazil as source areas, okay? Once the preliminary site assessment is performed, the site has to go under a confirmatory investigation. Okay, in all the source areas, all of them have to be investigated and determined if they are or are not contaminated. If the source area is considered contaminated, then the site has to go through a detailed investigation. If it is not contaminated, then the legal responsible can request the site, what we call site closure, okay? And what is the detailed investigation? The detailed investigation is when the site goes through determining the amount of contaminated mass you have at the site, if it's in the soil, if it's in the groundwater, if it's in the vapor phase, and what are the sizes horizontally and vertically of these contamination plumes. So that is what we call the detailed investigation in Brazil. Once we go through the detailed investigation and you know the size of your plumes of contamination, you go through risk assessment. And then it can be the human health risk assessment, or it can be the ecological risk assessment. It is very normal in Brazil to go through a human health risk assessment and not perform an ecological risk assessment because we still do not have a framework established for ecological risk assessment. The state of Sao Paulo, which is one of the states, and the states which has the better legislation in contaminated site management, it is establishing now a framework for ecological risk assessment. So it is more common to go only through the human health risk assessment at this point. Once you have the human health risk assessment, if the site poses risk to the people, then you have to prepare an intervention plan. If there is no risk, then the site can only go through monitoring to make sure that the contamination stays as it was foreseen, and it can go through site closure. If the risk assessment determines that there is risk on site, then the responsible for the site has to prepare an intervention plan. The intervention plan is the plan where you are going to say what are the remediation measures you are going to take, what are the institutional controls you are going to take, and what are the engineering controls you are going to take. Okay, so you put up an intervention plan, and then the company which was contracted, a company has to be contracted to put in place this intervention plan and establish the remediation, the institutional controls, and the engineering controls. Once all of these are in place, remediation, institutional controls, and engineering controls, the site can be closed through a monitoring process. And then it is closed. Site closure has to be determined the final use of the site. So if the site is going to be used for residential, agricultural, commercial, or industrial. It is very common in the cities in Brazil that industrial sites are now being turned into residential sites. Okay, so this framework is used in order to turn an industrial area into a commercial or residential site. We have from 2009 up until today, there are many technical procedures that are put in place. We have a governmental company called ABNT, which establishes the Brazilian framework, and we have a framework for preliminary site assessment, for groundwater monitoring wells, for drilling for environmental quality, confirmatory investigation, for detailed investigation, for sampling and monitoring wells, for human health risk assessment, for managing contaminated sites, and for developing a conceptual model. So these are Brazilian standards that we have in place. And due to our commercial laws, anybody who works in Brazil doing contaminated site management has to follow these Brazilian standards, since we do not have in place other specific standards, except in the state of Sao Paulo. In the state of Sao Paulo, there is a framework called DD38. It's the Directory Decision 38 from CETESB. CETESB is the state of Sao Paulo agency, and it has a specific framework for management of contaminated sites. It follows the framework which I have already talked to you about, but it has a lot more details on how contaminated site management has to be performed in the state of Sao Paulo. Many other states in Brazil follow the DD38 and have the DD38 mentioned in their legal framework also. So it is a very important framework for us in Brazil, the state of Sao Paulo management of contaminated sites framework. Once I can go. Okay. Talking a little bit about legal responsibility. Who is responsible for a contaminated site in Brazil? In Brazil, we have a framework. We have the main the main legal responsible entity for a contaminated site is the polluter of the site, okay? So first person responsible for managing a contaminated site is the company or the person or whoever polluted the site. However, we have three other entities that can be considered responsible for the site if the polluter is not known, and that can be the owner of the site. So whoever owns the site, even if they have not polluted the site, can be called to perform the management of this contaminated site. We can have what we call the superficiary. So anybody who is leasing the site or renting the site can be also considered responsible for the contamination of the site. And we also have what we call the exploiter of the site, or whoever is exploiting the site economically or is using the site economically can also be considered responsible for a contamination. So in Brazil, we have four main entities responsible for recovering a contaminated site. The polluter of the site in first place, and if the polluter of the site is not known, the owner of the site, the superficiary of the site, and the exploiter of the site. And it is interesting that many times we have the environmental agencies or our public ministry calling all four of these entities to recover a contaminated site. Okay, so it can be an overlapping of responsibilities of who is conducting a recovery of a contaminated site. For example, I am working in a site today in the city of São Caetano do Sul, where we have involved in the recovery of the contaminated site the company who is leasing the site or renting the site. They are responsible with the environmental agency, but who is performing the site management is the company who used to own the site, which does not own the site anymore, but used to own the site, but was not responsible for polluting the site. They bought the site, it was already polluted, they leased the site, and they sold the site. And the owner of the site today. So we have responsible for the management of the contaminated site at this area. The owner of the site today, the people who are leasing the site today, which is the superficiary, and a company who has already exploited the site, who is actually doing the contaminated site management, but is not at the site anymore. So we have three different entities at the site responsible for contaminated site management. And these three companies are going back to the polluter of the site to recover their money. Okay, so this is a very normal situation that happens in Brazil, that you have more than one company involved in the management of the contaminated site, and more than one company or one person being held responsible for management of the contaminated site. And what about the environmental consulting company in Brazil, since we are talking about the framework in Brazil? What is its responsibility? The environmental consulting company can be held also legally responsible for non-complying with technical requests. So it can be held responsibility for this. If, for example, the environmental agency sends a technical notification, a company is contracted to perform the studies that are told in the technical notification, and the consulting company does not perform these studies as required or as is presented, as is requested in the standards, in the Brazilian standards, the technical company can be considered responsible for not doing adequate work. If the company presents false information, if the consultant presents false information, it can be held legally responsible also, okay? And also the environmental agency in Brazil can be considered legally responsible for not conducting correctly the management of a contaminated site. So this is very important, the responsibilities regarding a management of a contaminated site. So an environmental consultant can be held responsible, again, if it does not comply with the technical requests made by the environmental agency or if it presents false information. And the environmental agency can also be held responsible during the management of a contaminated site if it does not adequately manage this contaminated site. The Konoma Resolution 420, which I talked about, requests also that in Brazil, these states hold contaminated sites databases. Although we have 26 states, we have only 3 which hold contaminated sites databases, and they are in the southeast of Brazil. It's the state of Sao Paulo, which we have talked a lot about already, the state of Minas Gerais, and the state of Rio de Janeiro. These are the 3 states in Brazil that hold contaminated site databases. Considering these 3 states, in Sao Paulo, we have a total of about 6,000 contaminated sites, a little bit more than 6,000. 285 of these sites are already under reuse, or they have gone through all the contaminated site management framework and have been considered adequate to move to commercial or residential areas. We have 1,902 sites in the state of Sao Paulo, which have been already rehabilitated, or they have gone through all the phases of contaminated site management, and site closure has been obtained. And we have 4,247 sites that are considered contaminated. This is a small number. There is an expectation that in the state of Sao Paulo, there are about 20,000 contaminated sites. Rio de Janeiro, the data is from 2015. That is the earliest data we have. 328 contaminated sites, and Minas Gerais from 2020, the data, we have around 700 contaminated sites. So you can imagine we have 26 states plus our federal district, and we are talking about around 7,500 contaminated sites in Brazil. This is supposed that we believe there are a lot more sites, more than 20,000 sites for sure in the state of Sao Paulo, and we have no idea how many sites are out there in Brazil as it is. Considering a study that was done in 2015, and this is the earliest study we have, we can see that in other states, we are talking about no more than 20 contaminated sites known per state, okay? That is a very small number, and that is because we are still beginning to do management of contaminated site outside of Sao Paulo, Minas Gerais, and Rio de Janeiro. So we have 23 other states plus the federal district, which have very few sites known and a lot of work still to be done. If we take a look at the amount of states that have potential companies of potential polluters, we can see that we have around 12 states that have sites with a medium to critical potential of pollution. And we have only 3 states with a contaminated site database in place. And if we look at the critical states, we have Minas Gerais and Sao Paulo, but we have Rio Grande do Sul also, which is the RS. Rio Grande do Sul still does not have a database, and it has considered less than 20 sites. We have 4 states considered high risk for pollution, and we have another 5 states considered medium risk for pollution. So we believe there still is a lot of work to do in the contaminated site management field in Brazil. If we take a look at how our government and political framework is established, we have a superior agency at the federal level, which we have all the ministries and the civil house of the presidency, which formulates national policies for contaminated site management and for anything actually, okay? Right after that, we have a consultative and deliberative agency, which is Konoma at the federal level, which has representatives of different sectors of the government, productive sector, and society. So Konoma is the consultative and deliberative agency which established the 420/2009 resolution. At a state level, in the state of Sao Paulo, we have an agency called COSEMA, and in the municipality of Sao Paulo, we have an agency called CADES, which are the agencies that establish the frameworks for the environmental policies. Right after that, we have a central level where we have the Ministry of Environment in the federal level, the Secretary of the Environment in the state level, and the Secretary of Green and Environment in the municipal level in Sao Paulo. These agencies, they plan, supervise, and control the actions that refer to the environment. Then at an executive level in the federal government, we have an agency called IBAMA and ICMBio, but considering management of contaminated sites, we're talking about IBAMA, that executes all policies and national directives for the environment. They are also responsible for the surveillance. In the state of Sao Paulo, we have a very important agency that is called CETESB, which is responsible for executing and surveillance. And in the city of Sao Paulo, we have an agency called DECONTE, which is responsible also for control and surveillance. So as you can see, we have a bigger level, which is the Government Council. Right after that, we have a consultative and deliberative agency in all levels, which is in the federal level is Konoma. Then we have a central agency, which is the Ministry of Environment. And beneath the Ministry of Environment, we have an execution agency, which is IBAMA, which is responsible for surveillance and execute all the laws. Moving a little bit forward in order for you to understand how we are in the management of contaminated sites. As I said, we have 3 agencies which have established at a state level agencies responsible for contaminated site management. They are these states in green, which is Sao Paulo, Minas Gerais, and Rio de Janeiro. In light green, we have the states which we can say that have a little bit of management of contaminated sites in their environmental agencies in light green, and all the states in orange do not have anything related to contaminated site management in their state environmental agencies. So we still have a lot to move forward. There is a lot of market in Brazil while we move forward. This is from 2015, but it's not very different today, okay? This is still very up to date. If we look at the states which have data regarding contaminated site management, as I have already said, we have Sao Paulo, Minas Gerais, and Rio de Janeiro, which have the data for contaminated site management. In purple, we have the states which are establishing, I'm sorry for that, which are establishing a contaminated site management framework in purple. And in orange, we have states which haven't even started talking about contaminated site management. If we look at the next picture, we have the states which have already established a control on their polluting parties, okay? So we have again, Minas Gerais, Rio de Janeiro, and Sao Paulo, which have a control on the polluting parties. In light green, which is a lot more than we had in the previous slide, we have the states which do control partially their polluting parties, and in orange, the states which do not have any framework or any legislation for controlling polluting parties. Something went wrong here. Okay, now my computer went out.
And I try press ask.
No, nothing happened.
Okay, so I think you need to end your presentation and start again.
It's not letting me end my presentation. That's great. Okay, what I'll do, Patricia, I will have to restart my computer, but actually this was my almost my last slide. I have one more slide which I wanted to talk to you about the size of the environmental consulting companies in Brazil. So I will talk about that. I will not present the slide. So in Brazil, just so you know, we have we have up to date known about 200 companies in the environmental area. Okay, these companies and in AESAS, we have about 100 companies that are associated to AESAS. These companies are separated in three major orders. We have companies which are specific about laboratory and drilling. Then we have a group of companies specific in remediation. And then we have a group of companies which are the consulting companies. Oh, now it went. It still doesn't move forward. And it's not letting me do anything. So I'm going to have to restart my computer. I'm sorry. Still talking about these companies in the environmental consulting companies, we have companies which are focused in site investigation. Then we have companies which are focused on remediation. And we have companies which are focused in preparing intervention plans. And we have companies which do all of these three areas of study, okay? Considering the size of these companies, most of our companies in Brazil, 80% of them are small companies. What does that mean? That means that their revenue is about $3 million per year, okay? 80%, so again, 80% of the companies in Brazil are considered small companies with a revenue of up to $3 to $3.5 million a year. And then we have approximately 20% of the companies which are medium to big companies. So there is still a lot, we still do not have a market which we consider that is, that we still have a market which we consider can grow a lot. And can still be well established, okay? So our market in Brazil still has a lot to grow in terms of bigger companies and having more companies and having the consolidation of these smaller companies into a consolidation of bigger companies. That's what I had to talk to you about. And I see there's a question. Patricia, I'm going to need your help just to see the questions, and then I'll have to restart my computer and come back in. I think Adelaide has a question.
Okay, Anna, thank you. It was perfect. Thank you for your presentation, for bringing to us the scenario in Brazil. So guys, if you have questions, please chat. So we'll ask all the questions. And we have one here. It's from Daniel. I think he's from Peru. I don't know if Daniel is with us now, but Daniel asked if, like AESAS, like the association, may the AESAS establish by agree what kind of remediation technology is more acceptable for contaminated sites, or the technology is still election by themselves? I think like from Peru. What do you think, Anna?
We have, it is very open here in Brazil that the environmental consultant determines the best remediation technology to be established. There is not one technology that is accepted, but many technologies are accepted, and Thiago will talk about that a little bit. But we did go through a phase in the beginning where a lot of pump and treat and soil removal. But today, the consulting company does an intervention plan, does a feasibility study, and determines what is the best technology. And this is usually very well accepted by the environmental agencies.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And Mark is asking us where they can access the contaminated sites database. I think in CETESB site. That's right, Anna?
In CETESB site, in Minas Gerais site, and Rio de Janeiro site. I will put that in the chat, the link to these sites. I will put that in the chat during the following presentation, as soon as I can get my computer to work again.
Okay, thank you. I don't know here what Mark is asking also, how about the other areas, states or regions, I think, about the database, if there are databases about other regions in Brazil.
That's a very good question. We don't have the databases in the other regions, but AESAS, along with the Brazilian Ministry of Environment, is working on a database for Brazil as a whole. Okay, so this shall be ready. We hope in the following next 2 years, we shall have this national database, and then that will compile the data of all the states, not only Sao Paulo, Minas Gerais, and Rio de Janeiro.
Okay, thank you, Anna. We have one more question here. Vinod, I don't know if I mentioned her name correct, but the question is, what if the pollutions are low-scale industry and the contamination assessment and remediation requires huge budget? Who will be responsible?
That's a very good question. That is the question of $1 million, we say here in Brazil. We have a lot, 80% also of the Brazilian industry is made of small industries, okay? We have had this in the state of Sao Paulo, where small industries have been called to do the management of contaminated sites. They do not have enough budget for that. And actually, these sites have been, or they get a fine, which sometimes they cannot pay either, or the site is left, is basically left and not done the management of the site, okay? What really happens a lot in the state of Sao Paulo is that many of these sites are bought by real estate companies, okay? These small industries are bought by real estate companies, which will end up doing the remediation and putting in place the intervention plan. But what happens if nobody gets this site remediated? It's called as an orphan site, as we call them here in Brazil. And we have a fund established, which is supposed to be used to perform the remediation of these sites. But this fund has money, but it's still not being used to perform the remediation of the site. So that is an issue we still have to manage here in Brazil, which is still not under control here.
Perfect, Anna. Thank you so much. I think we have no more questions as well.
So Patricia, I will have to restart my computer and I will come back. So if you can please present Thiago, and then I'll take over again.
Okay, thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. I will be back in a minute.
So now I'd like to introduce you Bernd. Bernd will present us the high resolution investigation tools in Brazil. So hi, Bernd. Are you here with us?
Hi, everybody. Can you see and hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, so I'm going to start to share my screen. Hang on.
We're still seeing the Anna's presentation.
How about now?
Oh, not yet. Let me try to close the Anna's presentation. Okay, now it's okay. Perfect, Bernd. We can see your presentation.
Okay, so you can see my presentation, you can see and hear me, so that's quite good for a start.
Thank you.
Let me just organize my screen. Okay, so as Anna said, there's a lot of development potential in Brazil, but I can also say that in the last 20 years that I have worked here in Brazil with environmental consulting. I came to Brazil in 1997 and started the company in 2000, and I can really say that there was a very good improvement in investigation technologies and remediation technologies, and also in the authorities conduction. So what I'm going to talk today about high resolution investigation tools in Brazil. It will be a very brief talk because I'm not going to go to details, to technical details. I appreciate very much that we can expose to the world what we are doing in Brazil regarding high resolution investigation. What is it all about? It's all about representativity of spatial data. So once you have done the historical research, which would be the phase 1 environmental site assessment, and you have identified all potentially contaminated areas, you are going to the technical investigation. And starting, a huge part of the contaminated sites that are in remediation processes are contaminated with organic volatile compounds, with VOC. So to start with the high resolution technologies, I would like to show you what we are doing in Brazil. We are using or passive or active soil vapor samples in high resolution to determine and identify the source zones for volatile compound contamination. So what you basically do is, and you can of course combine the technologies with a mobile lab, so that you are very flexible in the field, and you can clearly identify with almost zero of error where liquids, volatile liquids, have infiltrated into the soil. Okay, so once you have identified clearly your source areas, the aim of the detailed investigation is to find out migration patterns and where do I have transport of contaminants, where do I have accumulation of contaminants. And there are being used a lot of tools, a lot of different tools in Brazil, starting with the membrane interface probe, usually combined with a hydraulic profiling tool. So these are all tools that are being used with a direct push device to introduce the tool into the soil, and you can, this way you can have as a result a profile with which indicates the presence of contaminants. This is probably the most well-known high-resolution tool in Brazil, and it's widely used for VOC contaminations. Another direct push tool which is being used a lot is the optical image profiler, which is widely applied in Brazil as a direct push fluorescence tool for delineation of NAPL contaminations, and where you can really see in details where in your vertical distribution you can have the mass, you will have the mass of the contaminants. These two tools were developed in the US, and we've got also a Brazilian development, which I'm proudly presenting to you after this slide. Sorry. Well, we are having here the electrical conductivity tool, which is usually combined also with the membrane interface probe. And it gives us, it's a simple and older technology, mainly for the support of hydraulic profiling tool interpretation. I'm not going to expose the limits of the tools, but every one of it has, of course, its advantages and disadvantages. So after that, we are using the whole core soil sample tool, or different ones, to have a high resolution for hydrostratigraphic units, vertical screening, and source zone investigation of impact on soil. These techniques are used mostly in the southeastern and southern part of Brazil, as Anna said, where we have a higher level of knowledge in the investigation of contaminated areas. A low-cost example for vertical screening of VOC and soil vapor, which is quite important to determine the distribution, vertical distribution of VOCs in the soil, is the vertical screening with a photoionization detector, which is simply done using also the whole core soil samples to have a complete profile. And now I'm on the slide with the Brazilian contribution of a low-cost alternative for delineation of N-apple contaminations. So you can see here a box, a black box with a UV lamp. And so you can introduce your lineup with the soil sample, the whole core soil sample, close the box, and there you can see now the fluorescence of for example, oil contamination in the soil, which could not be seen without this technology. You can't see it without the slide. Okay, so another technology which is very important to determine migration patterns, because it measures the hydraulic conductivity, is the direct push injection logging tool, where you basically introduce this probe into the soil and you inject water into the formation, and then you measure the pressure that it suffers to enter the formation. And so you can make this in a very high very quickly. We've done about 800 of these measurements in 2 weeks, and it gives you a very good detailed image of your contamination distribution and shows you where you have transport and accumulation of contaminants. We're using this very much for DINAPL products, for example, chlorinated solvents, which are responsible for a large number of cases in Brazil and especially in Sao Paulo. And once determining these transport or accumulation zones in the profile, you use also a direct push sample method without installing monitoring wells, and sample where you have the different conductivities. So like here in the medium conductivity, or here in the high conductivity, or here in the very low conductivity area, which led to this sample here, showing free phase of DINAPL. So this slide shows how the direct push water sampling works. You basically introduce a probe into the soil and to push it back a little bit to have a filter area, and then you use a valve pumping the water from this depth into to have a sample, and then you can go on introducing the probe a little further, and so you can do this in the same boring point for different depths. Okay, well, this is basically, that was very quick, that was basically what I was going to show you, what we are using in Brazil as technologies for a high resolution site characterization. Patricia?
Hi, Bernd, thank you.
I'm already
thank
back.
You so much, yes. And Anna is also back. Anna is also with us.
Yes, I can take over if you want, Patricia.
Okay,
So since Bernd was so fast, I think we can have Thiago first, and then we can go to first questions to Mr. Bernd. Are there any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Let me see here. Okay, Danielle asks you, Bernd, if the COV instrument is similar to a PID, do you have a scale for calibration or field, or just in laboratory?
I think I didn't understand the question. Which instrument?
The VOC instrument, he wrote COV, the VOC instrument, is it similar to a PID?
The PID, Bernd.
Yes, the PID is clear, but what's it?
The instrument that you use, your probe, is it similar to a PID, or do you have a scale for calibration in field?
Right. Well, all right. Okay, I got it. Well, we usually use mobile laboratory, a chromatograph, gas chromatograph. So it's calibrated in the field to avoid high cost laboratory analysis in this phase. During the high resolution site characterization, we want to be flexible and fast. So we determine where the important spots are in depth. And after that, we take samples for laboratory analysis. Did that answer the question?
I think yes, and remembering that we have also the portable instrument, so we also use portable, and we can calibrate all them are in the field, or we can calibrate. And we have another question, Anna.
Yes. What about the cross contamination in the direct push method of sampling?
That may, of course, be an issue, but it's again, we are talking about the investigation phase. So you want to know where you have a higher concentration, where is a lower concentration, where you have a medium concentration, and after that, to have a better picture, you determine usually where you take samples and where you install wells, for example, to have a result without any cross contamination chance.
Okay.
I think those are the questions we have here.
Would you like to complement anything on that, Anna? Maybe?
No, I'm fine with your answer. Okay, so let's move to Mr. Thiago then. Thiago will talk to us about remediation techniques applied in the Brazilian scenario. Thiago is a director at TRS Doxer. Just a minute here. And he is also the president. He is also the president of AESAS. Thiago is currently responsible for TRS Doxer operations in Brazil, which includes management of all aspects of ongoing remediation and has included the successful completion of more than 10 thermal projects in Brazil. He has been in the Brazilian environmental remediation industry for over 20 years and has worked under construction and operation of many different remediation systems, such as pump and treat, soil vapor extraction, dual vacuum extraction, multi-phase extraction, air sparging, bioventing, electrokinetics, in situ bioremediation, chemical oxidation, chemical reduction systems, and thermal remediation, ERH and TCH. President of AESAS now, Environmental Consulting and Engineering Association since 2008. He has been involved in developing environmental legislation along with CETESB and INVAMA, and he is also president from the CETESB Remediation Chamber. So, Thiago, it's with you now.
Thank you, Anna. Can you guys hear me? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. I'll be pretty fast. So thank you so much for having me here today. So the idea also, as Ben mentioned in his presentation, is not to dive in very deep on the technology, but to give you guys an idea of what we have been using in Brazil. Brazil, as you know, most of the countries in the world, we kind of start using when something happens, right? On remediation. So we had big events that came up with new legislation, and then technologies came right after it to solve those problems. The only state in Brazil that we have a public release on the amount of technologies that have been used in the state of Sao Paulo. So in the state of Sao Paulo, once a year, the environmental agency is called CETESB. They publish a report where they say the amount of contaminated areas and also the amount of technologies that have been used on remediation. As you can see, most popular remediation technologies in Brazil are still pump and treat and multi-phase extraction, but that's mostly because of the gas stations that are still the highest number of contaminated sites. But on physical process, the most popular that we've been using in Brazil are pump and treat, hydraulic barriers, soil vapor extraction, multi-phase extraction, air sparging, and of course the thermal process, steam enhancing extraction, thermal conduction heating, electrical resistant heating. On chemical process, the in-situ chemical oxidation, in-situ chemical reduction are being really used lately in Brazil. Primary reactive barriers are also being used in Brazil, and bioremediation is beginning to gain a big market right now in Brazil. It's becoming more popular right now. Most of you know those technologies. Pumping treats, just pretty much pumping water, hydraulic barriers, multi-phase extraction system. And the reason why we have so many of those systems in Brazil is because gas stations are still the biggest number on contaminated sites. That doesn't mean that that's where most of the money in the market is. That's not true. The old industrial sites are, you know, the biggest projects in Brazil, but in number of projects, we still do a lot of remediation in gas stations here in Brazil, all over the country. Soil vapor extraction and vapor control is being a big issue in Brazil for the past 2 or 3 years, maybe even a little bit more. We as AESAS, we are helping CETESB to develop their standards for dealing with vapor intrusion, and that has become a really big issue since 2011, when we had some big cases that I'm showing you here, the areas in the state of Sao Paulo. So in Sao Paulo, we have 2 big rivers. This blue line here is the regional, the region line of the river. And of course, the city was growing, and they kind of canalized the river. And all these areas close to the river were either filled up with the sediments from that river, or was used old sediments, or were also used as open dumps. And the city was growing, and constructions were taking place of those areas. And we had this real famous case. This is a shopping center called Center Norte in the city of Sao Paulo, that methane was detected inside of the electrical conduits on this big shopping center. And that became a really big issue back in 2011. From that point, soil vapor extraction and subslab depressurization system became almost mandatory. And after that, there was this other big supermarket, and also a public university. All of them were pretty close to the river. And like this, many other areas have been managed for vapor control. So vapor extractions and SSDS became really popular in Brazil. Air sparging, we also use a lot here in Brazil. It's pretty common. In situ chemical oxidation, as I mentioned it for you guys before, there is it was really used 8 to 10 years ago. We started using it, then there was this big growth, and then there is this federal agency called IBAMA that decided they would regulate the use and the register of these products. And so this became a big issue right now in Brazil, because every single product that we use must be approved by IBAMA. Therefore, chemical oxidation, chemical reduction, it had like a little bit of downtime, if I can say that, in the past few years. There are many projects that are on hold, waiting for those licenses. Even ozone, they are somehow trying to control how we are using. This has been a little bit critical in the past few years, because it has delayed a few projects. But chemical oxidation, especially the use of persulfate, is really common here in Brazil. Chemical reduction, many of the products that are used all over the world are produced also here in Brazil. This is a picture from the city of Sao Paulo. So we've been passing through major change in the past few years. A great redevelopment in the big cities all over the country. Even though Brazil is so big, we are really high density. We have high density occupation in the big cities. Therefore, these big cities that were old industrial sites are now being redeveloped, and those areas need to be carefully investigated and remediated. The other thing is that clients are looking for more effective technologies, and also the environmental agency in Brazil is driven remediation not only by risk assessment, but also by mass reduction. And that became thermal remediation, pretty popular here in Brazil, if I can say. Although the number of projects are not, as it's not in the world, so many cases, but I would say that thermal remediation in Brazil, Brazil probably represents maybe 10% of the cases in the world per year of thermal remediation, if it's not more. We have all the thermal technologies available in Brazil. Most of the thermal vendors have offices in Brazil or joint ventures in Brazil. The least technology used in Brazil is steam injection. That's because most of our sites are really tight clay, so steam injection is more used on sand and gravel. But ERH and TCH have been growing a lot. So this is a site in Brazil, in the city of Sao Paulo, a TCH site in the city of Sao Paulo. As you can see, it's right in the middle of the city, close to houses. And this site, the company is remediating TPH on high temperatures. You can see the Sao Paulo skyline. It's a lot of big buildings and all this areas being occupied for new constructions. Whoops. And also year age is really common in Brazil. Maybe some of you don't know what year age is, but pretty much is different from TCH that we use a resistance to heat the site, a resistor to heat the site. With year age, we use electrical conductivity and electrodes. So we pretty much conduct electricity between two electrodes that will heat up the site up to boiling point of water and remove all VOCs. This is another site in Brazil, pretty big site. That was the biggest site in Latin America, maybe one of the biggest sites in the world. There were over 450 electrodes on this site. This is another thermal site in Brazil. This was conducted under a residential building, as you can see. Again, another site in Sao Paulo, thermal site in Sao Paulo. You have Sao Paulo skyline in the back, old industrial sites that are being redeveloped. This site was close to the Sao Paulo subway and under this active industrial site. Here's the subway line. So even challenging sites, highly occupied sites can be heated and can be treated in a very short frame. This is another thermal site in Brazil, another old industrial site that is being redeveloped. You can see each one of these is one electrode, vapor extraction line, and all the treatment area. So pretty much here in Brazil, as I mentioned, we have all the technologies available. Most of those vendors have partnership in Brazil. It's really common to build all the equipment here in Brazil, bring technology and adapt technology to the Brazilian reality. Brazilians are really open to new technologies. It's easy to bring any new technology to Brazil. Even the regulators, they accept pretty well any new technology. So as you can see, we have nowadays pretty much all the remediation technologies that are available all over the world. We have sites running with those technologies here in Brazil. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thiago, for your presentation. It was very clarifying, and we are ready to take any questions. Let me see, because we already have some questions here. From Cynthia, great presentation. Please, which remediation methods do you use for hydrocarbon recalcitrant contaminates, long years in soil, in clay soil, and for metals?
Cynthia, would have to know which kind of component it is. I mean, you can use, remediation is not about one technology. I would say that most of the complex sites, the best solution is combining different technologies. But as I mentioned, in Brazil, one of the technology I showed you is TCH. We are doing that on a site in Brazil that we need to achieve temperatures over 200 Celsius degrees to clean up the site. That's one of the technologies you could use for hydrocarbons or heavy hydrocarbons. There are other technologies that you can use to not to clean up metals. You mentioned metals also, right? But not to clean up, but to stabilize metals. It's also something that is accepted here in Brazil. So some product injection or something is also available. I mean, I hope I have answered your question.
Hey, next question. Good question. Has the ERD technique still been used, like injection of sugarcane molasses solution, for example?
It is. They are not as much popular as they were a few years ago. Like molasses injection was really used a few years ago. What we've been seeing, one of the difficulties that we have in Brazil is that we don't have the approval of any bacteria to be allowed to be injected in sites in Brazil. So you gotta make sure that you have all the bacteria available before you start any reduction process. So what we've seen in Brazil is that the use of molasses, some of the sites had a terrific results. Some of them you end up with a lot of chlorinated, with a lot of vinyl chloride, and some of them you end up with a lot of methane. So you just got to make sure that you can combine those with other technologies to make sure that you have delivered the site clean. And as mentioned, as Ana mentioned on her presentation, we as consultant or remediation companies, we can also be responsible if we do something that would somehow make the problem worse. So we gotta be really, really sure of what the technology we are using and what we're doing, not to be responsible for co-contamination or something in the end of the project.
Thank you. Two more questions, Thiago. We have been using catalytic oxidizers and thermal oxidizer SVE in one site. Thermal requires gas and electricity, but catalytic requires only electricity. What way thermal oxidizer is better than catalytic, and why is it developed?
I'm not an oxidizer expert. I have worked with both here in Brazil. I'll say I can talk to you about my experience here in Brazil about both technologies. I don't know exactly what you're treating with your oxidizer. So depending on the contaminant that you're treating, if you're treating hydrocarbons, pretty easy. If you're treating chlorinated compounds, you gotta be really careful because you might generate, or you will generate, a subproduct that is highly corrosive. But both works fine. Here in Brazil, you need a special license to use a thermal oxidizer, and you don't need a special license to use a catalytic oxidizer. The thermal oxidizer, because you have a flame and you might achieve higher temperatures than the catalytic oxidizer. The environmental agency in Brazil, they are more reluctant in letting you use those, but catalytic oxidizers are easier to get approval to use here in Brazil. And again, depending on on the type of your contaminant. If you're using a catalytic oxidizer, the contaminant itself will help maintain the temperature, so you might not use as much energy. You also, I mean, it all depend on the type of contamination and of the type of contaminant, also the concentrations.
Okay, I said two more, but we have one more that came in, Thiago. So two more now. Does any of these remediation processes stabilize heavy metals in wastewater irrigation, or anyone else have something about it?
In all the agriculture business in Brazil, it's something that we haven't started investigating yet. We don't even know how contaminated those areas could be. So that's probably one of the most challenging areas we will have in the future here in Brazil. But we haven't started doing anything on agriculture yet.
Okay, you're gonna like this one. Thank you for the presentation. Please, what are some of the challenges associated with the thermal remediation, especially with regards to ecology?
Thermal remediation do affect the bugs, for sure. Depends on the technology that you are using. You might kill all the bugs, like TCH you might have. And if you need to achieve temperatures over 100 Celsius degrees, you'll definitely kind of sterilize the soil. But remember that we are usually thermal is associated with only treating the source zones. So once you have heat at the site, clean up the source zone, all the bugs that are around will repopulate this area again. So actually, in the end, thermal remediation will end up helping bioremediation, because it will deliver a site with good temperature and with a lot of dissolved organic matter or dissolved organic carbon that the bugs will use as food, right? So in the end, thermal remediation most of the time it helps with the bioremediation. Here in Brazil, we have had many different challenges associated with thermal remediation because of some remediations that didn't end up quite well in the past. We thought that sites were clean, that they were approved for construction, and it's not that unusual in the state, especially in the city of Sao Paulo, to have pretty tall apartments that were constructed over contaminated areas. We have treated a couple of those already in Brazil, so we had to work under those buildings. That was pretty challenging. Also, that, as I showed you, one that it was really close to a subway line. We were hitting very close to the subway line. That was also pretty challenging.
The last one is sorry, Thiago.
Go ahead.
The last one is a comment that maybe you want to comment on top. Some oxidants, such as peroxides, are of first-order kinetics and persulfates of second-order kinetics. Even if you catalyze, you're still just accelerating the second-order kinetics. In general, oxidants is slower than thermal. It's just a comment.
From Lucio, I saw that.
Yeah.
It is, I think, the most challenging for all the other technologies. Lucio, is not only about, timing, and it's actually, being able to, as it is all over the world, even for whatever you are. I mean, if you have a tight clay, or if you have heterogeneous soil with sand layers, the most challenging thing is really how to make the oxidant or the reductor to have contact with the contaminant. It's really hard. That's why thermal is so is so fast and so effective, because you don't really need, you are heating the whole volume. That's the major difference.
Okay, Thiago, any other thing you want to comment on? Okay, then thank you very much. We
Thank
will
you, Anna.
go to a 10-minute break, coffee break, and we will be back. Now in Brazil, it's 11:10, so we will be back 20 past, which is there 4 o'clock right now. So we will be back at 20 past 4, okay? See you all in 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you guys, see you.
Okay. I see Paulo's online already. And so I think we can continue. Mr. Paulo Santos is responsible for ERM Brazil operation, currently leading around 230 employees in 5 offices, experience in growth strategy development and implementing organizational changes with a view to multidisciplinary team synergies and collaboration. A true believer in collaborative and participant environments, managing talents in an exclusive and team-building environment, following corporate governance and the health and safety aspects of the business. Geologist from UNESP with a Master of Science in Environmental Technology from in the Technological Institute of USP. Technical consulting skills include environmental site characterization and remediation, environmental strategy development and implementation. Was responsible for promoting innovation and standard practices around the Brazilian operation. In recent years, leadership style, strategic view of the business and collaborative approach have inspired team members to engage and contribute to achieve significant financial results with focus on internal processes, corporate governance, and health and safety performance. Paulo, it's with you now. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the kind introduction, Anna. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are located right now. First of all, I want to thanks to REMTEC and to IESAS for inviting me to be part of this presentation. And the idea here is to talk a little bit about the site rehabilitation and reuse process in Brazil. And as you see during the presentation, this is not something separated from the whole process of the contaminated site management. It's just one or two important tasks that needs to be accomplished in the whole process. So the idea, I set up the presentation in a few parts, and the idea is to have first a general context of what is going on in Brazil and the history of the whole process. And you see there is a lot of connection with Anna's presentation, because we are going to talk about the maturation process of the environmental agencies and its processes, which is the base for all the actions that is going to be in place, aiming to remediate sites. Then a little bit of an history of the site rehabilitation and reuse in Brazil. Just one slide about the legal aspects, once Anna already covered most of it. So the idea is also to bring, to reinforce some of the important legal elements that is part of the process. Then some current initiatives. So where we are at this moment, and what is really going on with the boots in the ground. And I brought 4 case studies. Of course, there are a lot going on, but we do have some few cases that are kind of iconic in the arena of reuse of contaminated areas. Moving forward, the general context. Here, I think it's important to bring these 5 items just to have a better understanding of how things works in Brazil in terms of rehabilitation and reuse of contaminated sites. There are federal and state environmental agencies that basically is the ones responsible to set the proceedings and to follow on the activities that is being proposed and is being developed. And of course, when we look to the history, they were not there since the beginning, and there is a maturation of all the process alongside of the evolution of these agencies. And as Ana also mentioned in her presentation, Brazil has 26 states, and a lot is under their responsibilities, but there are a lot to be done in terms of resources, availability to work on the process and proceedings, and also to make sure things are being done properly. So it's an area that is in constant development and still needs a lot moving forward. As mentioned, all these processes have been matured along the time. And especially over the 10, 15 years is where we saw a lot of improvement, new technologies, new ways to see the things, and also to on how to use and how to use the available technologies and how to approach the best way to rehabilitate and or reuse certain areas. Initially, the primary focus, the primary focus at this moment, when we take a look on the proceedings after the involvement and the maturation of them, the primary focus is always remediate to mitigate human health risks and environmental risks. So if we look to all the remediation processes that are in place in Brazil, the end point is around that main objective. And usually these processes are led by the landlord or by the entity who caused the contamination, as also Ana mentioned in the first presentation of today. One important piece that is real key in terms of more specifically to the reuse is the dynamics of the city growth and the population growth, and their needs to have constantly become an important part of the process. So there are urban pressure, specifically in the big centers where we, in the past, where we had the industrial areas in the suburbs that are now in the middle of the city. So there's a lot of these dynamics in terms of lack of space and the continued growth of these big cities. So this is an important element to be considered in the reuse of contaminated site approach. And here, I think it's, I just want to bring some granularity and elements in terms of how the contaminated site process evolved over time in Brazil. There were a first in fact, they started to be reactive to the situations that were in place, to a more proactive way of doing things at this moment. And we can segregate this evolution in three big generations. The first one were very reactive. And the focus was fully on protecting danger. And this, of course, caused some out of focus of reuse. So reuse and the rehabilitation was not even touched during this first generation. The second generation of a way to to manage this between 1980 and 1990, the corrective policies were focused on a systematic approach to manage the contaminated areas. And this was through the approval of legislation which establishes legal responsibility and criteria for remediation according to the land use. So this was starting to be in place by the end of the 90s, with several technical documentations being issued. I think here it's important also to say that CETESB had an important role in this process, being the first state agency to step in and to look for a well-defined and established process for contaminated site management, making how can I say, partnerships with international agencies and technical groups. In the third generation, from the beginning of 90s until now, there was a clear maturation of the policies. This, of course, based on the concept of economic cycle and prevention. In several cases, we can see a drifting focus on the economical feasibility of remediation and not a request based on the need to achieve certain goals, but there is also an economical feasibility view on the whole thing, and also flexible standards to achieve treatment goals and on the reuse of the area under the pressures that I was talking about. And this, in this new generation, the use of human health protection was human health and environmental protection using risk factors were really embedded. And of course, the issue of contaminated areas has integrated the theme of urban revitalization, as I mentioned before. And the main objective of this is to give new sustainable use to areas that the first activities with polluting potential and to reintegrate them into the urban environment, with considering this pressure to redevelopment. And we will see that in more detail in the four case studies that I'm going to bring. Another important in terms of general context is the definition of terms and terminologies, and in this point, CETESB and IBAMA and ABNT have these three entities have played an important role, setting the rules and also providing an important guidance on where to move and how to move forward. And here there are some terms that I brought, but I would like to focus on the two important ones that we are talking about, that are rehabilitation and reuse. For example, the rehabilitation is basically the process that aims to provide the safe use of contaminated areas through the adoption of a set of measures to lead to the elimination or reduction of the risks imposed by the area on the assets to be protected. So that's the meaning of rehabilitation, and the set of actions that is going to be proposed by the landlord or by the one that caused the contamination should have the focus with that main meaning in the back of their heads. And the reuse in the aspect of contaminated site management is the area where the new land use is intended to be established with elimination, reduction, or acceptable levels of the existing risks to the goods to be protected arising from the contamination. So here there is also an important aspect is that, for example, when you have an industrial area and you want to change the use for a residential area, all these changes needs to be considered in the process that is being proposed. So important aspects to be defined and to set the scene. And this is a recap from what Anna brought to us in the beginning of the presentation. There is a process in place, and this is very well established by the DD38. And the rehabilitation and or reuse is part of the process. So it's not something separated or something that we bring in at a certain moment. No, it's one of the tasks in the contaminated site management process. And this starts with the site, the contaminated site in the identification, where we have a group of activities to be developed. And then the rehabilitation process starts with the detailed site investigation, and then with the risk assessment, moving to the remediation conceptual design, then implementing the remediation process, and closing with the post-monitoring event. So these four main tasks are part of the rehabilitation process. And then we have, among these, we have the site registry that needs to be done with the local agencies. And then here is all the discussions and the needs around reuse. So that's in summary, that's the overall process for that. So moving to the legal aspects. And this is going to be just quick comments. Again, like mentioned by Anna in the initial context, we have a federal governing law established by Konoma, the Konoma 420 from 2009, and then we have the state responsibilities, where we have several laws, decrees, and the state agencies documents, like the case of DD38. So this is how basically this should be played by the states. And in case the states doesn't have this proper guidance and documentation, the Konoma 420 will be used by the basis for that. And besides that, we have the Technical Normatization Brazilian Association documents, which establishes good practices and documentation on how each task or each step has to be done. And moving to the current scenario, what we have in place, what kind of processes we have in place.
Hi, guys. Anna, are you here? I think Paulo...
Yes, I am here. I think Paulo fell.
Yeah, I think his problem with the connection. Let's wait a few minutes. I will check here with him.
Today we have many emotions during this presentation.
So guys, while we wait, Paulo, if you have questions, please, you can make the questions in the chat. So at the end we will answer all of them. So Paulo is telling me here that it's trying to back. So let's
there
wait.
He is.
Okay, so that's okay.
No, not okay yet.
Not yet. Let's try again. He's trying to back, guys, so sorry about the shoes. So but remembering, we were having the other session that is Sustentaton that will be held all day long today and tomorrow. So if you are able to, after this session, go there, we will pleasure to have you in the other session. So remembering that if you have questions, please chat. That at the end of the presentation of Paulo, we will ask all the questions
to all participants.
Yes, we'll bring all them together. Not yet, but let's wait, guys.
Can you hear me, Patricia?
Yeah.
Great. Apologies for that. I had a short break here.
Okay, so Paul is back.
Everything is happening today, Paulo. That's okay.
Let's go there.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Anna, please, if you could enable me
yes,
to
I will,
share the screen.
Okay. That's right now. Try, please. That's okay? Okay.
That's okay. Just confirm that you can see, please.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So the idea here is just to make a recap of which are the important steps in the rehabilitation process. And I'm using the Sao Paulo State guidance because is the one that is well-defined, well-established. It is the one that that has been used more frequently across the country. So the rehabilitation process, even though it starts in the detailed investigation, the intervention plan preparation is the key piece of that. Is where you're going to set the objectives, considering the need for the specific site according to the results of the risk assessment. And there are three main actions that needs to be considered there. First is the source control. Then you move to the achieving acceptable risks for the identified human or ecological receptors. And then you have to control these identified risks based on the applicable legal standards. This is where you are going to define for the use that you are proposing for that land, which will be the techniques and the actions to be put in place to control that and to allow the rehabilitation or the reuse of that site. And who should do this? The legal responsible are required to perform this step. And I think the other important question is how. And here we have a lot of detail and a material guide on the DD38 proceedings. And I think this is an important document that supports the legal responsible to take that action, of course, supported by specialized companies. Well, and during this step of this intervention plan preparation, there are some important items also to be considered, and I split that in 5 main topics. The first is the elimination, the containment, or isolation of the primary or secondary source of contamination. So you need to make sure during the rehabilitation process that things don't get worse, and you have to control that. The second piece is to prevent the prevention or have exposure control for the receptors or to the ones that are going to be exposed to that contamination. And here there are two ways to achieve that: eliminating the pathways or removing the exposed receptors. Then the third item is the mass removal. The fourth is the retraction or put in place actions that make the contamination plumes shrinking. And the fifth action is the containment of this contamination migration to avoid worst scenarios. So these are the key items that is part of the intervention plan, and they needs to be well defined and well established in that document. And again, according to DD38, there are some differentiation in terms of approval needs from the agency to move forward with the execution, with the rehabilitation, properly said. In the case of the brownfields or areas where you are proposing redevelopment or reuse, as well as some critical areas that were defined by the agency in the Sao Paulo state, you need a proper approval from the agency on the planning that is being proposed before moving forward. On the other hand, for industrial sites, fuel bases, gas stations, landfills, you don't need the approval from the agency to move forward. So basically, the importance of this aspect is to the fact that for every reuse, you need the industrial site that has been demobilized and demolished, and you want to put in place a residential buildings, for example. This will need to go through agency approval. And here, I think it's also important to reemphasize what Anna brought to us in terms of registers and numbers that we have. And this came, all the numbers that I'm presenting came from the National Program for Contaminated Sites Recovery from the federal agency. And here it's clear that there's a lot to be done in terms of identifying the contaminated sites. As we can see, Sao Paulo is the only one that has substantial registers in terms of identifying the sites, but keeping in mind that most of these almost 6,000 contaminated sites registered are gas stations. So there's a lot to cover in the future. And in terms of stage of the site management, as we can see here, in terms of rehabilitation and reuse, we have a little bit more than 20% of all the known sites. So under rehabilitation process, we have just 3.5% of the registered cases under that process. And 20% are at this moment rehabilitated or remediated. And what is the current status in terms of where we are in Sao Paulo state, which is the state where we have the bulk of the registers in place? From all those almost 6,000 cases, almost 1,200 are rehabilitated for declared use, 1,500 in the process of remediation or rehabilitation, 1,400 in the step of monitoring for site closure, and we have only 241 that are in the reutilization process or reuse. And here it's basically the cases where it's not only the iconic ones that I'm going to share in the case studies, but there are several cases, mostly from the past 5 to 10 years, where we have this urban pressure to redevelopment, and there are an important actions from the construction sector in terms of redeveloping old industrial sites or commercial sites and setting them to reuse. So this is and this presentation is going to be shared with you guys afterwards, but this is the overall scenario in Sao Paulo state, which is the one that we have the bulk of the data in the country. Well, now let's see some case studies. I think it's the most effective way to understand how things are working in Brazil. As mentioned in most of the presentations, Sao Paulo state still the focus of where the things have been done. We have lots of process in Rio, Minas Gerais, Rio Grande do Sul, Bahia state, in the northeast areas, but the bulk of the cases are developed in Sao Paulo state, and here, like I mentioned before, the urban expansion pressure is really a key aspect for the reuse decision that we're taking. Of course, there are challenges in place, and I have to say the financial aspects is also a challenge. And the reason why there are several initiatives, parallel initiatives, in order to develop and to define funds to be used remediation these, especially the orphan sites, with the focus of reuse. So there are initiatives from the public attorney in Sao Paulo State, the district attorney in Sao Paulo State. There are also NGOs that are trying also to set up this kind of tool in order to facilitate and eliminate the financial challenges for some of the cases. And of course, the considering the city policies and state policies for redevelopment and taking account the social and urban aspects are also crucial in this process. So the first case that I want to bring is the Victor Civita Square. It's an old incinerator located in the Pinheiros neighborhood in Sao Paulo State, and Pinheiros neighborhood is a very well-established residential area. But there were this old incinerator there, and that was a private initiative from a local company that owns that site, that decided to reintegrate it to the city and to the community. So this is an aerial view of the area, and here is how it was in 2007 with the main building of the incinerator already removed. And this is how it is today. So the idea was to integrate this area to the community, and the concepts that were applied in the strategy defined in the intervention plan was to eliminate the exposure to the receptors, and also to establish a land use restriction, and that's the reason why it became a square. But that was I think one of the first iconic cases in Sao Paulo City. The second one is the Moca Neighborhood. And the Moca Neighborhood is well known from the past as one of the industrial suburbs of the municipality of Sao Paulo, and it's where the tank farm of the fuel distribution is located. And as you can see in this image from 1958, it's something that is far away from the residential area of the Sao Paulo in that moment. Of course, over the years, and we're talking about something around the beginning of 2000, we can clearly see that the city basically overcome that border, and we have a lot of residential areas surrounding this old industrial district. And of course, there are a lot of contamination, not only in the tank farm, but also in the industrial sites surrounding that. And here it's an important need as well. It's not just it's just a matter of planning the rehabilitation, remediation, and reuse, but we also need to take into account the how the urban planning of the municipality is defined. In Brazil, there is every municipality has its development plans with well-established residential areas, industrial areas, areas with multiple purpose use, commercial areas. And when you have disestablished 4 decades ago, and then there is this urban pressure for development in the city. We really need to take a deep look on this and review and make sure that the land use regulation also follows this process and to become part of the reuse strategy for a certain area. And here is what was done. Back in 2008, the tank farm was completely removed, and the area was in the soil and groundwater remediation process. And here is how it is today. So, like I mentioned, make sure that the planning and the urban mapping for a proper use of the land needs to follow side by side with this process. And here is a case that there is the urban pressure to use this land, but until now is still there. There is no industrial activity at this place at this moment and the tank farm area, but it's waiting for an investor for reuse, for redevelopment. Another important area where we have interesting examples is the Jeruba Tuba neighborhood. It's an area with strong industrial focus since the 50s, and mostly with chemical and chemical industries and metallurgical industries as well. And this, as many others, was previously classified as an industrial area. So it was located in the suburbs of the city, but after decades of intense urban growth, the area is now located in a residential area surrounding it, basically. And in this case, the environmental agency put in place effective control actions starting in 2001, basically because of the urban transformation pressure starting in the beginning of the 90s. And in this specific area, there is also in place water use restrictions, considering the multiple sources of contamination in the groundwater, and the tasks that is being put in place for many stakeholders to try to solve the problem. In this area, if we look back also to the 50s, there are some old facilities like Philippis Valita, and there were also an old golf club surrounding that. And as you can see here, the development of the area was also very low for that period of time. And here, already in 2004, we can see the industries in place. In 2007, some of those industries already being decommissioned. Most of them moving to other sites outside of the city, moving to other states due to the tax incentives. But there is a mobilization of the most industries of this area. And here is in 2008, where we can see some redevelopment. In this square here, there were the construction of 6 residential towers, and also the Senac University Center. And here is how it is today, with a completely redevelopment of some of the industrial sites that were in place. But this is just a piece of the challenge in this region. So pieces of it, reuse was implemented successfully, but there are other parts of this region that we still have legacy sites and contamination being managed. And there are several actions from universities and from the legal authorities to find ways to expedite the process and give a proper reuse for the region. So some important aspects on Jeruba Tuba. Intense activist efforts from the public institution to develop the strategies. Like I mentioned, there is a partnership with the universities, so USP, University of Waterloo in Canada, University of Guelph, and also private companies consortiums to have a better understanding of the contamination, better investigation, and also to properly define the best rehabilitation process or even the reuse for that area. And the active zoning review, as I mentioned before, is also something important to make sure that the development in the area is properly in line with the urban zoning in the development plan of the city. And the last one is the extension of the Shukri Avenue, which is also a very important case and where we can see a material reuse of a legacy area. This is how the area looks like today. So if we look back, it was also an industrial district with many known companies that decided to move from that area or decided to close their facilities. And here's the how things evolved. So if you look back in the early 2000s, this site is still there, and then we can see 2 years later some demolishing activities, removing the buildings and preparing the land for the reuse. And in 2008, we can see already in place the two malls that we have there, the Morumbi Mall and the Marketplace Mall, the Rochevera complex as well. And this area continued to be redeveloped, moving forward in the Shukri Avenue. And here in the beginning of 2009, you can see also in the area one, basically everything removed to start the processes of the reuse. And here's how the region looks like today, with a lot of new buildings and the new use of this previously contaminated site. So we have, like I mentioned, 2 malls. There are Rochevera Business Center, 2 more corporate buildings, and there are more to come further down in the Shukri Avenue. So basically, it's all from me. Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. Again, apologies for the internet connection issues, and I hope I was able to give you a general overview of rehabilitation and reuse in Brazil.
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you very much. We have no.
I think we have no questions, but guys, if you have questions, please leave it in the chat so we'll ask all the questions.
Hi, I have a question in the chat. Yep, I put.
Okay, here, Daniel. For delicate ecosystems, may you use just bioremediation techniques or also conventional techniques? Paulo, want to answer that?
Yeah,
Thiago?
I can take that.
You can take that, Paulo?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I can. No, I think like Thiago mentioned in his presentation, there is no a recipe for that, and the remediation plan and the techniques that you have to consider needs to be in line with the outcome that you have for that site, with the type of the soil, depth to groundwater. So every single aspect of that site needs to be considered. And I have to say that you can use every single technique that is available to be considered in those kind of sites.
There's, yep, that's exactly it, Paulo. Here in Brazil, actually bioremediation is beginning a couple of years from now. And as Thiago also mentioned, we still are not able to inoculate bacteria, but we have been able to do bioaugmentation, and that has been very successful in many areas. But
Yes.
As you said, we're not required to do only bioremediation in delicate ecosystems. There's another question: are Brazilian companies able to give technical support in other countries of South America? That's a good question for you, since you work a lot out of Brazil.
And I like just to call Bernd and Thiago, so if you can back to the table, so they also can ask all the questions. Thiago, Bernd, are you here with us?
Yes.
I'm here.
Yes.
Done.
Okay.
Great.
So guys, don't be shy. If you have questions, please leave it in the chat, so we will ask you. So who wants to ask this one?
I can start with this one. I think there are besides the Brazilian local companies, I think there are also global companies that are also present in Brazil, but also with branches across the South America. And I can say at BRM, for example, we have an office in Buenos Aires, we have an office in Lima, we have an office in Bogota, and other in Guyana, in Panama, and also in Mexico. So I think not only the international and global companies, but also the Brazilian ones, they have the ability to support any case in South America. That's what I have been seeing, inclusive.
And thank you, Paulo. And I'd like to make a question to Bernd. Bernd, you presented one technique. Could you talk a little bit more of the other investigation techniques, just pretty fast, a little bit more of what other kinds of techniques we have available in Brazil, please?
Well, what do you mean I presented one technique?
No,
There were-
one, you presented some, but can you just talk a little bit more of what kind of investigation techniques we have available in Brazil? The hand auger, the hollow stem auger. And
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course, you mean the boring techniques.
the boring techniques, yes.
Yes, of course. In the beginning of the larger scale investigation activity in Brazil, they were used usually manual augers, which is being substituted more and more by better techniques, better technologies, which avoid cross contamination issues. And so there are stem augers, and there are hollow stem augers. We are installing wells in different depths, also using double case technologies to avoid vertical migration of contaminants, of denser contaminants during the investigation process, which is a very serious issue if you don't respect this this possibility of vertical migration.
Thank you, Bernd. Thank you very much. Any other questions, people?
And I have one, I don't know exactly for home, but I'd like to talk about PFAS. How Brazil is managing PFAS contamination?
I can introduce, then I can pass the word to Paulo, because I think he has more experience than I do. We still do not have in Brazil any legal requirements for PFAS. Usually in Brazil, when we don't have, in Sao Paulo state majorly, when we talk about Brazil, we are majorly talking about Sao Paulo state. When we don't have any specific requirements or legislation, we usually go by the EPA Region 9 requirements. So, but that is still very incipient here in Brazil, and we consider it an emergent contaminant. We do have, though, some requirements from the agency. In some specific cases, the agency has required the evaluation of PFAS in soil and groundwater. Paulo, could you complement a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, Anna. No, and I think that's the case. It's very incipient, and I think the agencies are following EPA initiatives on that aspect. And like you mentioned, there's no regulation, but in my case, for example, we received we're managing one site for a client, and we received. And for example, and we received a technical opinion from CETESB requesting to evaluate PFAS in soil and groundwater, which was a surprise for us. So it's something well established yet, but it's coming. I think it's something that is going to be in place very soon.
Yeah, I think I can confirm that. And during our IASAS conference in 2019, which was in July 2019, there were several speeches about PFAS in Europe, in the US, and because in Europe, for example, it's a very big issue, and we are also having one case now in the state of Sao Paulo where we are investigating PFAS, and we are also already have laboratories in Brazil that are analyzing PFAS, which is quite new. Because as far as I know, about 6 months ago, or maybe a little more, there were no PFAS analysis in Brazil. So that, as Anna said, it's an emerging contaminant.
Okay, thank you, guys. So we have one more question here from Daniel. Can I, Anna, or?
Yes, go ahead, please, Patricia.
Okay, so in case of national parks, Brazil has some special risk assessment. Who can ask?
I can answer that. In case of well, as I said during my presentation, we do have a requirement for ecological risk assessment, but that is not well established in Brazil. Okay, so very few ecological risk assessments have been performed in Brazil, especially because we don't have a lot of knowledge on background, and that has been an issue. In the state of Sao Paulo, there is a technical notification from CETESB that requires, when you have a legal conserved area, then you have the potential of contaminating this legal conserved area, which is a national park, for example. Yes, you have to perform an ecological risk assessment in these cases. But again, that's only in the state of Sao Paulo. There have been some ecological risks assessments going on in the state of Sao Paulo, but not in Brazil as a whole. Does anybody want to complete what I said? Okay.
Okay, guys, more questions? Well, I think not. So I'd like to say, if there is anything we haven't covered about Brazil, I will leave here my email. I will leave here the IASAS email, so you can feel free to send us an email Anna, Thiago, Paulo, Bernd, or everyone from ISAS can answer your questions. And if we don't have more questions, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining with us. Remember that we have also the Sustainathon today and tomorrow, so we stay with us. And thanks you all, thanks Paulo, Anna, Bernd, and Thiago. And guys, if you want to say something about ISAS, about Brazil, please feel free to tell people something about Brazil, our country.
Patricia, thank you very much for this session. Thank you, Hemtech, for inviting all of us. It was very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, guys.
Everyone. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you so much. See you. Bye-bye.